Okay, a lot of YouTube channels these days and some other online sources are talking a lot nowadays about Torah and Torah keeping. Now, to the average Christian, God following person, doesn't probably know exactly what that means. I mean, when I grew up, or growing up, I was told that Torah meant the Old Testament in Hebrew. And that's partially true, although it's actually not. So today's video is about how to follow Torah, or what that even entails, and what that even entails. So what is Torah to begin with, right? Well, Torah is actually not the Old Testament as per se. It's actually just the 5 first books of Moses. Now, the rest of the Old Testament, which is called the Hebrew Scriptures, that's called Tanakh. And that's an acronym, mainly meaning Torah. I believe it means the Psalms and other writings, or prophets and writings. Either way, that's what they call the Jewish or the Hebrew Scriptures. Now, Torah is obviously the first 5 books of Moses, meaning that is the law of God, right? So, as we already discussed in previous videos, the law of God is how we know what sin is and how to not do sin. So God tells us how not to do the sin and what the sin is. And it's a very good thing, because especially in modern churches, we invest a lot of time and energy into figuring out what a sin is, and we end up inventing a lot of sins which just aren't there. There's sins in everything nowadays. Now, some people say it's a sin to have a glass of wine. Some people will say it's a sin to eat meat. Some people will say it's a sin to there's everything. You can fill in the blank what a sin is nowadays. We can just invent them. But in reality, God very carefully and very purposefully made laws so that we know what a sin is. And as Paul said, where there is no law, there is no sin. So we know that there is no sin if there is no law. So that is what Torah is. It is the laws of Moses, well, it's called the laws of Moses, but as we know, it's the laws of God. It's God's Bible. It's his book. He wrote it. So we can be childish and say it's the law of Moses, but it's actually the law of God. So that's how we know what a sin is. Now, how to read this Torah, the Torah? How do we read it? Because we can read it very plainly from the English. As we know, it wasn't originally in English. Everybody knows that. It was originally in Hebrew. But it was written that way. But now in our modern English, as we know from most churches, we've abandoned the law of God entirely. We say, it's all covered in the blood of Christ, and we don't have to do that anymore, and we can just do whatever we want. Excuse me. But we can invent the sins that we want to punish others with. So moving on from that, so how do we actually read it? Well, we read it in the light that it is God's expression of love towards us. Because if God didn't give us these laws, we wouldn't know what to do. We don't know how to serve him. We don't know how to not sin. We don't know anything. We need these laws to know that to know what to do and how to serve God properly and uprightly and righteously. If we just read it as a book of laws, it doesn't seem very loving. So how are these laws God's expression of love? Well, one, of course, it prevents us from doing sin if we follow. Prevents us from actually doing sins if we follow it. So that's one expression of the love right there. The other expression of the love is that they are guidelines, because God made humans. He made the world. So he knows what is good for you and what is bad for you. And so he put laws in place that guide people to not do things that are bad for them. And that's just how it is. So that's God's expression of love towards us. Our expression of love towards God is obedience, as we should know from what Christ said. As you know, those who love me will keep my commandments. God also said this in the Old Testament as well, just so we're all clear on that. So that's the standard of love from God to us and from us to God, is the Torah, which is why so many people are talking about keeping Torah and obeying Torah. Now we know a little bit what it is, and also how to read it, because there are some laws that, to the casual observer, seem a bit bizarre. Like not like there is some in the English. It looks really bad. Like, don't shave your head or your beard. Now, as you can see, I've shaved this morning. But in the Hebrew, it's not shave, it's pull out, to tear out your hair. And you might think that's a really weird command, to say don't tear out your hair. You think, well, most people don't go around tearing out their hair. Strangely enough, it was a fairly common practice of the time, especially for pagan worship. It was seen as if the priest or people who worshipped this pagan god, if they hurt themselves enough, like cutting themselves and pulling out their hair and beard and all that they would draw the attention of their god, and their god would have mercy on them and do what they were asking their god to do. It seems a little bit strange perhaps, but it's a fairly common practice. And you can read about this with Elijah, when they got the two altars, and the other priests are walking around cutting themselves and screaming and yelling and making a big kerfuffle trying to get their god to light the altar. And then, obviously, as the story goes, Elijah just prays and the fire of heaven comes down and devours the whole thing. So that is the way we should read the Torah, as an expression of God's love. So when we see an odd command, especially in our English Bibles, we should really take the time to look at the words behind it and the subtle meanings and nuances and the context that it's written in. So when we read a command like you shouldn't shave your beard, well, does God have a problem with beards? Well, I doubt it. He created men with beards. Does God have a problem with hair? Well, no. He created men with hair and, well, women with hair as well. So, excuse me. So we need to read these things carefully, not take them out of context and then use them as a battering ram to batter other people. We need to really work through these things in your daily devotions / studies, because a lot of people do take these out of context and use them to bash people who want to follow Torah and want to praise God and worship God in that way. Now, a lot of people come to me and they say, well, can we even follow this Torah? Because they're told that the New Testament tells us that it's a burden and slavery and there's a list of terrible things that they will call the Torah. But it's never called that in the Bible, just so you and I know. But it is called that. They believe that, so that they believe there is no way to actually follow Torah. Well, my question straight away is, well then, how did the Israelites follow the Torah? How did King David follow the Torah? How did Abraham follow the Torah? How did any of these people follow the Torah if it was impossible to keep, impossible to do? How were they? You know, you read about the parents of John the Baptist. It says that they kept the Torah, you know, faithfully, perfectly, it even says in the English. Well, how can you do that if it's impossible to do? And we somehow got it into our brains that in the New Testament now we can't do it anymore. Well, I think that's a little bit facetious. And at the same time, a little bit silly, because that's just plain outright ignoring the facts. If they could keep it then, they could keep it now. We haven't degenerated as humans. Well, we probably have, but not that much. Not gonna chase that little story down. Not in this video, anyway. So, where are we at? Can we follow the Torah? Well, yes, we actually can, because, like I said, King David could, Abraham could, you know, Moses could. All of God's people through the Bible could. Not all of them did, but we could. And God says a lot of the time, you know, this is not too hard for you. I haven't made this an impossible task. This is not too hard for you. You can do it, and you will do it. And follow me. So we have to believe God on that. God doesn't lie to his people. So we have to go for that. And the last point I wanted to really raise, this is a bit of an introduction to the Torah just thing. It's not going anywhere deeply into anything. But the last thing I really wanted to address in this video is the beauty and the blessings of Torah. A lot of people, like I said, read from the Old Testament and say, oh, it's a curse and a burden. Well, the Bible doesn't say that. You know, you read the Psalms and it says that the Torah is a blessing and light to my feet, that it's beautiful. And I just can't really reconcile that, because, well, then the Bible's contradicting itself. That's an issue. So what is actually going on here? Well, to cut a long story short, a lot of people misunderstand Paul in the New Testament, and it's mainly Paul, because you'll never find Jude or James or John, to list a few, contradicting the Torah. But people straight away go to books like Galatians and a little bit in Ephesians and a few other books as well. It's where they straight away go. They also go to the book of Hebrews straight away to try and discredit the Torah. Well, in that case, I really think people are misunderstanding Paul, especially because Paul was a Torah teacher. So and a couple of times he admits that he's never broken the Torah, that he follows the Torah, and that he's always kept the Torah. Well, if he's preaching against it, and he also swears that he's never taught against it. Well, if he never taught against it, on the one hand, he's swearing to that, and on the other hand, he's actually is teaching against it. He's either the biggest liar, or we really misunderstood him. And I'm going to go with the second option here, that we've really misunderstood him. And I would recommend that you really do some research in this area, because it's one of the biggest lies, I would say, told in Christianity today is the lie about Paul. So I just wanted to point out the beauty of it, because when I first came across this, because I wasn't always a Torah follower, that For the first time in my life, I could read the Psalms written by David and Asaph and a few others and really appreciate what they said. You know, when they say, your law is like a lamp to my feet, and it is a blessing, and there's so much poetically beautiful language in the Psalms. For the first time in my life, I could read that and understand, like in your heart, you can feel what the psalmist is trying to say and is saying and expressing. You can feel it, and it truly is a beautiful, beautiful thing. God's word is beautiful and praiseworthy. I hope that I can help you in your journey to viewing Torah and the Bible in general in a better, or at least a different sense, more fuller and complete way. Thank you for your time. Consider subscribing if you found this one helpful. Thank you.